This is the most important video you'll watch all week as America comes to grips with a massive influx of immigration in the last few years. I think Douglas Murray's grounded insights on the same happening in Europe will change the way you think about the entire debate. In the conversation you're about to watch with host Andrew Neil, Douglas had the most satisfying response to leftist activists that try to conflate race and culture to shut down immigration skeptics as racists. Just take a look at this before I tell you how.
When I look back, certainly in the history of my own city in Leicester, when 5,000 Ugandan Asians arrived in the early 70s, there was huge fear and uncertainty and a big campaign against them coming. But now we can't imagine our city without the hard work and entrepreneurialism of the Asians.
Well, let me put that to Douglas. Why exactly are migrants leading to the fall of Europe?
Well, the example that Liz gives is a very pertinent one, actually. That Ugandan Asian migration to Britain, we still talk about, like we still talk about the Huguenots. But that migration is now replicated all the time. Since 1997, when Blair came in, the same movement we had once of the Ugandan Asians into Britain happens every 6 weeks to Britain.
Right, but why is it leading to the fall is what I'm trying to get to.
There's one particularly important point, I think, in this, is that we've made the presumption in Europe, and particularly on the continent, where it's very much more accentuated than it is here. We made a presumption that societies are places where you can bring in huge numbers of people all the time. I mean, 6,000 is an average 24 hours arrivals in one Italian island these days, and has been for recent years, 6,000. My view is that when you bring people in at that speed, at that scale, we make a fundamental mistake about our societies. And in actual fact, our societies and cultures are pretty fragile ecosystems. They're not things you can just keep on doing things to and expect the same thing to continue.
But why does migration lead to the fall of Europe? And I still don't understand why it's leading to the fall as opposed to creating problems as well as opportunities. But migration doesn't lead to the fall of the United States.
Well, there are several reasons for that. One is, of course, the United States is a country that was built on migration, and it actually has migration as an ideal, the idea of it being a place you go to and become part of the American dream.
Couldn't we do that too in Europe?
Well, if we did want to do that, then we should start quite soon, and we're not doing that.
But you wouldn't want to do it either, would you?
Well, no, that's not true. My contention is that if we'd had this movement of people, and we had a clear idea of what we expected of people when they arrived, then it would be possible. It could be possible. But that is so far away from the discussion we've had for decades now, because we have consistently, I chart this in the book, we have been so muddle-headed about it. We had a time when we thought that everyone, for instance, Angela Merkel said this, we had a time after the war when we thought all the migrants would go home. We thought they wouldn't stay. The guest workers would do the job and then leave.
And Germany couldn't do without them now.
But that was a mistake. The fundamental thing about it was a mistaken idea. Then we had the idea that people would come and that they would become exactly like us. Then we said, we don't actually want you to become like us. We want you to celebrate your own culture, not the culture that we have in this country. And then we decided at some point in the last 10 years, actually, we do want you to become like us. These are totally different messages we've consistently given out.
And that's where the UK, as well as Europe at large, have failed to make up their minds. You can almost sense Douglas Murray trying hard not to swerve in the direction of bringing up the race or nationality of the migrants into the UK, because that's genuinely not relevant. By the way, do subscribe and ring the notification bell for more discussions like this. The true question is how a place like the United Kingdom wants to identify itself. Does it want to be a nation state in the traditional sense where borders are tight and a particular few fundamental ideas and values overlap across the nation? Or does it want to be a place like, for example, Dubai, which embraces the idea that it's willing to dilute the notion of an indigenous population or value system in order to welcome migrants from across the world and contribute to it? And there's nothing wrong with either of those approaches. The problem is when a continent as large and developed as Europe just sits on the fence for decades, while holding a lot of tangible and intangible wealth that it stands to lose. A place like the United States has also had contentious debates around how much immigration is needed. But at least it was clear that it was going to turn itself into a land of opportunity for talented people from across the world, and enrich both in the process. And seen from this perspective, the immigration debate is almost a sliding spectrum between retaining cultural hegemony and versus benefiting from the best people in the world that they have to offer. The failure to decide which sacrifice the UK wants to pick is the core of the modern cultural clash happening in the UK and Europe around migrants. And you know what makes that clear? If you look at the percentages in both the US and the UK of how much foreign-born migrants form a part of the total population, you realize that it stands at almost the same at around 14%. So that diagnosis by Douglas Murray makes all the more sense. And by the way, we're talking about legal migration here because the massive influx of illegal migrants, whether that be on the southern US border or in the UK with migrant boats, are not even part of this discussion. Even legal migration is a game of balancing risks and rewards for the host nation and countries in Europe, or America can't really be held to a different moral standard for immigration than other places in the world. Douglas Murray himself made this idea clear in his very important book called The Strange Death of Europe. A passage from it reads, and I quote, "The first arrivals benefited Europe by bringing a different culture, their vibrancy, and their cuisine. But what did the 10 millionth bring that was different from all those before? The European public was far ahead of the politicians in recognizing the benefits were not endless. Long before the politicians noticed, the public already knew that a continent, which imports the world's people, will also import the world's problems." And that's precisely the point, though unfortunately Andrew Neil's left-wing guests couldn't grasp the idea that all things are good in moderation, and that includes immigration.
It's remarkable, I think, how well we've coped as a country. And it always strikes me that, people come here because they see us as a land of opportunity, where we believe
as they used to see America, a beacon,
and democracy, where they
a city on a hill,
exactly, where they value our freedoms, our democracy,
absolutely,
and they know that they can build a life.
I wouldn't absolutely guarantee that in all cases, Liz, if I may say so. I wouldn't guarantee that people move here because they want democracy. A lot of people
you seem
I
to have
see
a bleaker view of what we are and what we can achieve than the people who come here.
Look, my view is that when you go to the places that people enter Europe, as I have done a lot, if you go to those places, you find people, not just people fleeing war, but you find sub-Saharan Africans and others coming for a better life. Nobody blames them. We would do the same thing. The point is that Europe is a tantalizing prospect because of our wealth, because of our opportunity, and we do not have an attitude as a continent about who it is who should be here. We at the moment allow anyone who walks into Europe, or in the case of this, who goes a few miles off the Libyan coastline, to be picked up by European naval vessels and brought into Europe. And that seems to me to be a very unwise policy because, as I say, it is in the long term unsustainable and does not ask the fundamental questions we should be asking.
Both America and Europe are certainly a place of much greater opportunities, but there's a difference between saying that and implying that there's some kind of special moral responsibility that it gives those places on the topic of migration. Right now, there's a total of around 28 million immigrants in Europe, which makes up around 6% of the continent's total population. And those are just people that are recognized and legal migrants, because there are likely hundreds of thousands more that have quietly slipped under the radar of the immigration authorities, especially after the multiple wars in the Middle East in the last 2 decades has created an unprecedented migrant and refugee crisis. And when something like that happens, host nations and populations have all the right to voice their opinion on how much immigration and multiculturalism they want. So far, the population in Britain and the wider UK largely have a positive view of immigration, but there's certainly a growing political movement that coming out of the fringes and refusing to be shut down by accusations of racism or xenophobia for simply taking a stronger stance on immigration. A survey from last year revealed that 58% of British people say the country should, quote, let people come as long as there are jobs available. And that's actually a reasonable bar if you look at places like Canada and Japan that are actively trying to welcome in immigration to support their small or aging workforce. Douglas Murray is one of those people on the immigration debate that do a great job at separating himself from the far right, while also making a logical case for slowing down migration. And whether you agree with him or not, it's certainly refreshing to see that the political right has been able to make a coherent and respectable case for its positions after decades of left-wing policies and opinions on immigration have reigned supreme.